Are we live? I think we are. Let me turn this thing off before it starts ringing. It's my phone here. I use that also to go live on TikTok. Welcome to the stream. I'm Father Roderick, and it is time for the weekly Star Wars Hour. It is the time that we discuss all things Star Wars. And I still need to do something very important, and that is to give my review, my reaction to the last episodes of Star Wars Andor. I miss it already. I don't know about you, but it was so fantastic to have 12 episodes. Nowadays, television shows usually are very short. It's like 6 episodes, 8 episodes. With Star Wars Andor, we got 12 episodes, and then it becomes like a staple ingredient of the week. Every Wednesday, I would look forward to a new episode. And even though I thoroughly enjoyed all 12 episodes, and I'm so glad that we got so much Star Wars, now that it's gone, it's like, oh man. And yes, thankfully, we've got Willow now, which has started. A sequel to the movie that I loved as a child, or I don't think I was a child, probably was a teenager by then. But anyway, it's one of my favorite Lucasfilm fantasy movies, and now to have that sequel, to have another television series, fills in the gap a little bit, but it's not Andor. It's just I want to go back there in that universe that was so well done. Anyway, so today we'll talk, of course, about the season's finale. I want to talk about the 2 episodes that lead up to that season's finale, and then we may also speculate a little bit about what's to come in season 2 that is, I think, currently in production. They are filming right now. But then they will take at least a year for all the special effects. So unfortunately, next year, I don't think we're going to see season 2. That will probably be 2024. That sounds so far away. Oh my gosh. Thanks for joining me today. Let me see who's there in the chat room. We've got Sheet Palpatine. And if you are also watching this but you haven't introduced yourself, I can read all the comments. I'm simul-streaming this to Twitter, to YouTube, and to Facebook. If you're watching this on Twitter, you may want to go to the YouTube page, because I don't think that Twitter allows you to comment. Obviously, you can retweet it or leave like a comment on Twitter, but I'd rather invite you to be part of the community on YouTube. Usually when I'm doing this over time, people will start to streaming in. So by all means, let us know who you are, where you're watching from. And of course, if you haven't seen Star Wars Andor yet, then maybe you want to wait for another live stream, because we are going to go in depth on the spoilers. This is one of my deep dive episodes. So I record these for my patrons. So there's a podcast that I do for people that support me. If you want to join that community, then the link is down below in the screen. And so there, I do this weekly show called Story Secrets, and I do that because my patrons have asked me, can you do like a super deep dive thing where you just tell us your thoughts, your first reaction, but also your maybe the deeper layers in the series that we watch. So I'm hoping to do more anime deep dives now that we finished Andor, and I might actually also do a Willow series, because it's great. It's I really enjoyed those first 2 episodes. But as always, I listen to my patrons. So if you have any other preferences or suggestions for my Story Secrets podcast, and let me know. So the way it works is, if you become a patron, you get like your private Patreon podcast feed that you can then enter into your podcast software. And as long as you're a patron, you have access to that feed and to all the episodes that I've created. I also think that you get access to all the other episodes that I've already posted to that feed. If that's not the case, then let me know and we'll figure out something. But I think that's how it works. All right. Well, it is now about what is it, 5 p.m. my time. I I kind of expect this to be a long show because we're going to talk about 3 episodes. So maybe this will go over an hour. We'll see. For the podcast, I will even add more stuff. So I usually add audio from the television series, music, sound effects. It becomes more of a, I don't know, more immersive experience. So if you're interested in that, then join my Patreon. All right, let's go. By the way, before I start, can some of you that are watching this, can you let me know if the audio is okay? Because I'm using a brand new microphone. It's the Rode NT1. I was using a very cheap microphone, which I cast aside, which was like I don't know, like $20 microphone. This one is a little bit better. But since this is the first time that I'm using it in this setup, I would like to know if it's okay, if it's clear enough. Maybe there's too much echo or anything. Let me know if there are weird audio things going on. Hey, GB from LA. This is not a general Ask Me Anything stream, but so I do those also during the week. So I tend to focus more on Star Wars related topics. So your question about the Bible in a Year podcast, I've talked about at length about that in my regular podcast, my weekly show called The Break with Father Roderick. So if you look for The Break, and you can also go to my website fatherroderick.com, maybe do a search. I'm not sure if it's in the show notes, but I hope you can find the episode where I talk about that. And also in our Patreon community on Discord, we also talk a lot about the Bible in a year. Sheet Palpatine says the audio is perfect. That's good to know. Hey, Jerry. And Drew is there. Audio is coming through well. Very good. Well, that's all I needed to know. We can start. I don't have any fancy jingles or opening videos because, of course, this is like I'm recording this as an audio stream for the podcast. Andor episode. Wait, I will start with the Star Wars Andor episode 10. One Way Out. Today, I want to talk about the last 3 episodes of Star Wars Andor, but I want to start. Wait, no, that's a bad. Sorry about that. I still have to put myself in the mindset. Like I'm recording these reviews as both a 3-parter, but I also want to later on be able to separate them into individual episodes for the podcast feed. So my apologies. Let me do a restart. Star Wars Andor episode 10, One Way Out. I want to talk about this wonderful, it's not the penultimate, but it's like the, okay, sorry. Gotta start again. This is what you get when I do a live stream. You see me mess up. I do this all the time, but if you're listening to my podcast, you will never hear these mistakes because I edit them out. I always have a trouble getting started for some reason. Once I'm in the show, there will be no problems, but the beginning sometimes is just like it's like a cold car that you try to start and it's like it doesn't want to start. All right. Star Wars Andor episode 10, One Way Out. Let's talk about episode 10 of this amazing Andor series. I still think it's one of the best things that we've ever seen in Star Wars. Of course, I'm not talking about the movies, but this is so incredibly well done. And I can't wait to let you know my thoughts about this fantastic episode about the prison escape. I love this entire story arc of Andor. Well, of course, I don't like it that Andor is in prison, but I think that it's something so different and so special with these prison break episodes that I can't wait to share my thoughts about, well, what this story leads to, and that's, of course, Andor escaping from this prison, and hopefully he's not the only one. Let me read you a short synopsis of the episode, in case it's been a while since you've watched it. Let's refresh our memory. So what happens? By breaking a water pipe and flooding his work floor, Cassian disables the floor's security system, allowing work crews there to overpower the few guards and escape. Kino uses the prison's intercom system to encourage others and other people to that live in the prison to escape. And then, as a result of that, the rebellion sweeps through the entire prison. Despite his role in the escape, Kino reveals that he can't swim, and he must remain in the prison surrounded by water. Cassian swims with the other escapees and reaches land. Mon Mothma, meanwhile, meets with Davo Skulden, a shady businessman who offers to help finance her projects, but Mon Mothma refuses after Davo requests that Mon arrange a meeting between her daughter and his son, an initial step towards marriage in Mon and Davo's Chandraland culture. ISB supervisor Lonnie Young, secretly a rebel informant, meets Luthen and updates him on the ISB's activities. The two men reflect on how they are both trapped in their roles. So, obviously, this synopsis, this summary, concentrates the various story arcs, but the episode itself, I think, did a terrific job intercutting all these different people and their subsequent situations. And I think that is important to realize because the title of the episode, One Way Out, at first only seems to refer to the prison break. There's only one way out, actually. That's what all the prisoners are chanting when they are escaping. But if you think about it, this is also true for the other situations. This is also, the title also applies to Mon Mothma's situation, where she doesn't seem to have any options left. The one way out is to sacrifice her daughter to this old tradition that she herself, in a certain way, has been the victim of. And then this also applies to the conversation between Lonnie Young and Luthen. Both of them also, even though they would like to escape from the situation that they're in, they too feel imprisoned. They're locked in. They can't escape. There's only one way out, and that is to move ahead and to stay put. So the title, I think, means different things to different people in this episode. I thought the overall look of this particular episode was amazing. We've seen glimpses of the prison escape, turns out. Back then, we didn't know that. We saw this in the first trailer for Andor. We saw these prisoners running in the corridors. And at that time, I never thought that was part of a prison. I thought it was on a planet, or it looked a bit like a clone facility. Now we know what this meant, and the kind of the very artificially clean environment of that prison. And now we also know why it's so pristine and almost looks like a lab. It's because they are making important elements for something that will be revealed later. Those of you that have seen the finale already know what I'm referring to, but we know that it's important for the prison to be as clean as possible, because they're working on technology that is important. But it's a stark contrast with the grimy nature of that final encounter between Luthen and this undercover agent at the ISB. We are taken to this very high up level in Coruscant, where everything is kind of rusty and dirty and grimy and depressing. And it's interesting because you always wonder, are these environments also reflecting how people feel? Well, that's definitely the case for Luthen And what's his name? The other. I don't think we heard his name that often. Lonnie Young. I'll have to Lonnie. Let's call him Lonnie. So Lonnie and Luthen, they are in this kind of gray, dark time of their life. The future doesn't seem bright for the Empire. They choose this white, stark, clean, very abstract environment that, as I explained in one of my earlier commentaries, is reflective of THX 1138, or the first movie that George Lucas directed. And I think that it reflects kind of the vision and the mindset of the Empire. For them, it's all about efficiency. It's a machine. It's a factory. The future has no room for nature, for randomness. It's all about this machine that moves forward and tries to remove what they see as dirt or sickness. Remember that analogy that was used in one of the ISB meetings, where they see the rebellion as a cancer, as a sickness that you have to cut out and throw away. And so I think that the architectural choices that we see reflected in Andor show us that they consider everything that is not the Empire, that is not functional, as superfluous and even as a threat. Look at the prison quarters. How can they survive there? I mean, mentally, to live in such a kind of plastic environment. There's nothing personal. Like in most Earth prisons, at least you can put up some photographs of the people that you miss, or you can kind of personalize your cell. None of that is possible over there. Every single thing that you see in that factory is for productive purposes and nothing else. It's crazy. So I loved the look and the contrast between the various looks in this episode. I was also intrigued more and more by Mon Mothma's part. And it came as a shock to me. I was wondering, and I've kind of had some issues with the pacing of Mon Mothma's story arc. I felt it was just kind of a bit plodding. It was always a bit in the same environment. She was either in Luthen's shop and antique shop, or she was in a taxi, or she was in her very luxurious apartment. And we've seen a few very rare scenes of her speaking to the Senate, but it all felt a little bit like a repetition of things. And maybe that is deliberate. Maybe that is what her life looks like. It's like this very, very hard, slow, step-by-step attempt to facilitate the rebellion. She's not even really part of the rebellion yet, but she knows it's happening and she wants to help. But it's everything in the Empire is locked up, and every step takes so much effort, and so it seems as if she makes almost no progress. But all of a sudden, this all comes on a breaking point where the only way that she can cover up the kind of the problems with her banking accounts. So there is a hole basically in her finances, and she's very worried that the Empire will start to inquire where that money went. And so her only way out seems to be enlisting this Davos Skulden, apparently from her own planet, from her own culture, but she hates the guy. And I think previously her husband even talked about Davo, or at least seemed to be affiliated to people like him, and she didn't want to have anything to do with crooks like that. And now she has to bring him in to solve her financial worries. And then the price that he asks is something you never want to hear as a parent. It's a sacrifice that seems impossible. And her first reaction is no, out of the question. I'm not going to do that. But she's with her back against the wall. She will have to do something. And the one way out seems to be to, well, allow for this encounter to happen. And maybe she's rationalizing it later on as well. It's just an introduction. It doesn't have to come to a wedding. But her own life is proof of where this can end. And so, do you want to inflict to your daughter what was done to you, and that clearly resulted in a very unhappy marriage? It's going to be interesting to see what she will choose. I won't give any spoilers about subsequent episodes, even though I already know what's going to happen. But in case you're listening to this in chronological order, I just want to keep it. I want to keep it at this. I also really loved the talk between Lonnie and Luthen. I really didn't know that he was a spy, and I can imagine that if you are an expectant father, because I don't think his child is already born, because Luthen tells him. So apparently Luthen knows a lot about his informants, more than actually Lonnie wants him to know. But imagine how the birth of your first child, how that changes your perspective, and how much the stakes are now raised for him, because if he is discovered, not only will he become the victim of the Empire, but probably also his family, also his young child. There will be no future. Or maybe, as someone who works at the ISB, he knows that the punishment can be final for transgressions like this. So he wants out, but then Luthen knows that that's impossible. And Luthen here shows his shady side and how far he is willing to go in order to make sure that everybody stays silent. We've already heard that he is okay with the rebels now killing off Cassian if they ever find him, because he has become a liability. So Luthen himself is not like the rebellious hero. He too is seems to be stuck in this situation where there is only one way out, and that is like, the rebellion has to succeed, but then the price that you have to pay is huge. He has to sacrifice Cassian. He, in a certain way, also has to sacrifice this young father, and he then not really justifies it, but he explains to Lonnie that he too has sacrificed everything he had. And he says some interesting things in that speech, like high up there in Coruscant, that makes us all kind of glimpse a little bit of his past. There's much more to his character than we know. And what I wonder is, will they expand upon that later on, or is this just one of these ways in which we're just plunged into a story and we don't have all the facts? It's what Star Wars has always done. With the beginning of A New Hope, you have no idea what the Empire is and why this big Star Destroyer is chasing this small ambassador ship. But that's why it's so cool. That's why it's so engaging. You want to find out more. And actually what we're currently watching with Andor is filling in that story that we never got in A New Hope. It's like, how did the rebellion get its hands on the plans for the first Death Star? I personally hope that they will show us a little bit more of Luthen's story, because I'm just not certain that we'll ever get the chance otherwise, unless it is in the form of a novel or a comic series. But I don't think that they're ever going to do like a prequel to this prequel. So hopefully we'll see maybe a flashback, or maybe Luthen himself will reveal what he's actually talking about when he says that he made mistakes, or he was too abrasive, or I don't know exactly how he talks about his past. Maybe I think I have part of his talk of his how do you say that? It's not really a speech, but his conversation with Lonnie in the section of this episode where I quote my favorite part of the dialogue. I also really love the choreography. Let's go back to the prison break sequences. I love the way they choreographed that. The realism of it. It was a messy escape. At one even like they don't even know if it's going to work. They flood the floor. They hope there's going to be a short circuit that will disable this potentially lethal electrical floor, and then they have to jump on this elevator that lowers, but it kind of breaks and it doesn't really work, and so you see them all like climbing and trying to get out. It's a big mess, and it's unlike the kind of choreography that we've seen in the past, where usually when there is something like an escape, it's still, you kind of still follow what's going on. One of the first times we see a prison break is, of course, in A New Hope, when Luke Skywalker and Han Solo are trying to liberate Princess Leia. And that goes awry because they don't know what they're doing. They're improvising like Han Solo. Yeah, everything is okay. And then he shoots the security cameras. What a great plan. Not. And then Leia takes over, grabs, I think, Luke's gun and shoots a hole that will actually lead to the trash compactor. But it almost seems a bit too convenient. It's like, okay, give me this, I'll shoot that, and it will jump in. And then it immediately moves to the trash compactor sequence. And we don't see, how the security of the Death Star is reacting to this. I feel like here it's and maybe it's because of the nature of the show. It's a television series. You have more time to show us. The movie had to just move on, quicker, faster. That seemed to be the kind of the rationale of George Lucas when he was directing A New Hope. But here they can take time, and I loved how they showed this escape. Also, Kino's role, how he is slowly getting to the point where he's courageous enough to realize that he also only has one way out, and it's ultimately a sacrificial way out. He sacrificed his own future because he was hoping to get out of prison, and then he realizes, well, that's probably never going to happen. But he must have known. Well, actually, he knows, because every prisoner that has been brought in knows that this prison system is surrounded by the sea. We haven't seen any ships there, so maybe he already realized at an early stage that he wasn't going to make it. And yet, he is the one who takes the lead, and Cassian knows that only he has the authority to rally up the other prisoners to take over the various floors, which he does. And I loved how the episode gave it some time. So you see how he's gathering, he's mustering courage to lead the escape. And Cassian, you would expect Cassian actually to be the big leader. After all, he's the main character of the show, but he's the supporting role here. He is like, you can do it. Just go for it. And I love how Kino, who actually was always the leader and seemed to be so strong, now all of a sudden he is like uncertain and doesn't know how to handle this, but you see him grow throughout this process. This brings me to what I think is the genius of this episode, and also a deeper layer of this episode that you may not have realized when you were watching it. The story of Kino is, in fact, very much inspired by the story of Moses. Think about it. Kino is there with all these other prisoners, like the slaves in Egypt, and Moses. And Moses has has the high ground in a certain way. He is brought up at the court of the Pharaoh, but he has compassion with all these slaves. The thing is, he doesn't know that he's actually one of them. the moment that Moses realizes that he is himself also part of that oppressed people, he takes the lead. He no longer thinks about himself or his own safety. He becomes a leader. And the Lord asks him to become that leader. Just like Cassian here appeals to Kino to, instead of what he constantly did in the previous 2 episodes, is think about his own escape. I'm going to get out of here. There's only a short time if I do my job and make sure that these prisoners are submissive and do their job, then I will get out. And now he realizes, but I'm one of them. I will never get out of this prison. My lot is the same as the lot of all these other prisoners. I'm one of them. And then Cassian here is the quest giver in a certain way. It's like God in the story of Moses. Like, I need you to be the leader. God also doesn't take over from Moses. No, he appoints Moses to be his voice. And you see the same structure here where Cassian is encouraging Kino to lead his people to freedom. And so that's what he does. Let's go. Let's go up. There's only one way out, one way out. He encourages them, and then he climbs up and up and up. He stands for his people. He protects them. He goes after the guards, kills a couple of them. You also see the inversion of the power, just like in the story of Moses. At first, you've got the people of Israel fleeing, and then the very powerful army of the Pharaoh is going after them. But then when they're in the middle of the Red Sea that has parted thanks to the leadership of Moses, all of a sudden the waters start to return to its place, and they're submerged, and they're all killed. And here you see that same inversion where there is also a flood in a certain way caused by Cassian. He breaks the pipes in the bathroom. So the water, I think, has a deeper meaning. It's not just a practical gimmick to cause the breakdown of the security system, but the water is also, in a certain way, reflective of the water of the Red Sea that will become a means to escape. It's through the water. You have to go through the water to go to the other side. And then later on, of course, the plunge in the water of the sea is like a baptism moment where you have to jump. It's a leap of faith, literally. And this brings me to the final moment with Kino and why I think this is inspired by Moses. Just like Moses, who leads his people through the desert for 40 years, ultimately, when they reach the threshold of the promised land, Moses is too old. He's sick. He cannot continue. He will not be the one who leads his people to the promised land. He stays behind, and he dies before he ever reaches the destination of this journey of liberation. And that's exactly why Kino stays behind. I thought it was masterful and sad and tragic, especially the way it was performed. And we heard later on that they did actually a number of takes here, different approaches. There's one where it's just frustration and rage, and another one. This one was very subdued, this take, and I think it was perfect because it showed that there was this resignation. Like, Kino knows that this is the end of his journey, but it's also the fulfillment of his vocation. And so it was proper. It was the right thing to do to leave him behind in a certain way, at least story-wise. If you're like me, it was like, man, I want to see more of Kino. He's such a great character. Maybe in the future they'll bring him back, but I don't think they're going to do that in the context of Andor. I don't believe it. Maybe later on, as they do very often, he will have somehow escaped and he'll return as a cameo in a cartoon, in an animated series, or maybe they'll do something with the novels. But I don't think with Andor that would be a smart move. I think it made it so much more dramatic, and it shows you Again, the sacrifices that people make for the greater good. Just like Luthen, Kino will never see the dawn of the time where the Empire is no longer in power. They will not see that new morning, but they have been preparing the way in a certain way. They sacrifice their life so that others may live. That seems to be a recurring theme here in Andor. Sacrifice for the generations that come after you, and that's a very selfless act, very heroic act. So the heroism of Kino is the fact that he continues to lead the people to their liberation, even though he realizes that he won't be part of that future. I think it was absolutely one of my favorite moments of the entire first season. What I also liked about the way they let's go to the whole Jung and Luthen sequence here. What I really appreciated there was the way in which they filmed it. You follow Jung, and you don't know at that moment that he's a spy for the rebellion. That he's secretly informing Luthen about what the ISB is planning and what the Empire is doing. And that's another quality of this series. It gradually reveals. It doesn't spell it out. You are constantly engaged to think, oh, wait a minute, I know this guy. Where is he going? Why is he all of a sudden walking these very dark corners of Coruscant? Why doesn't he just take a ship or a taxi? After all, he works for the Empire. And then you feel like, oh, wait a minute, maybe he does this on purpose. And it's only later on that you realize that he first went down to the underworld of Coruscant, probably to make sure that he isn't followed. And he goes into the parts where nobody really knows who he is. And then he takes the elevator that goes all the way up. And it is symbolically so cool that he is going up, but there is no escape. Like, the up is, of course, kind of the movement that you think, oh, he's rising above his troubles. But no, he will have to go down again. It's this moment of realization up there with Luthen that he is actually stuck in the belly of the beast. And so this elevator feels like a coffin. It's tiny, it's cramped, it's dirty. The light constantly flickers. And at times, it seems as if the elevator is going to stop right there. And it shows kind of his internal state, where it's like between darkness and light, but the light doesn't seem to be reliable. And the color is a sickly green, almost as if you are on the verge of vomiting. You're so sick, literally, of your situation, of the Empire. But once you step out of that elevator, there is only a chasm beneath you. They're on this ledge, and there's no way up anymore. This is like the final floor, you could say, where the elevator goes. He's not in control, and there is only one way out again, and that is either you jump off here and then you fall to your death, or you take the elevator, the coffin, right back to your kind of symbolic grave that is the ISB. I hesitate about my favorite scene. I loved Kino's final scene, but I also really liked Luthen's monologue up there, and this doom of both of them. Like, just the realization of the sacrifice. It was so powerful. In term, the way it was filmed was super simple, but man, it's something I never thought I'd see in Star Wars. So incredibly well executed. Let me go to this monologue of Luthen because it's definitely the best part, the best quote. It's not really a quote, but it's the whole writing of this was incredible. The dialogue in this series, I think, is the new golden standard for Star Wars, and I hope that we'll move away from that very theatrical delivery that we are so familiar with when it comes to Star Wars and go in this direction, because this is, it's out of this world. Okay, so here is how Luthen explains to Young what his sacrifice, that Young is not the only one who is imprisoned and who has to make sacrifices. He says, calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chances at inner peace. I've made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago, from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. That's powerful. And then what happened 15 years ago? My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, they've set me on a path from which there's no escape. Almost seems as if 15 years ago, he entered the path of the rebellion. And at that time, it was because of the wrong reasons, because of ego, ambition. And it's only 15 years later that he realizes what the price is going to be that he has to pay. And maybe this is, he mentions this because it's also what Cassian is experiencing. He is entering the rebellion also for the wrong reasons. He thinks it's just a job. It will give him enough money to escape to a safer place with his mother, and it's only gradually that he starts to realize what the rebellion truly is, how much he is now a part of it, and how much there's actually no escape. And there is a high price that he will have to pay. Luthen continues, I yearned to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost. And by the time I looked down, remember they're up there, there was no longer any ground beneath my feet. That is a beautiful congruence of what he's saying and the setting of that conversation. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. This is dark. And we know that he does that because he's ready to kill Cassian or have Cassian killed. And he's condemning this young father to a life without a future. And that's exactly what the Empire does. And the Empire robs people of their dignity and of their future and kills them to reach their goals. And Luthen is using the same tools. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. That's powerful. And the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything. You'll stay with me, Lonnie. I need all the heroes I can get. Like, this redefines what a hero is in Star Wars. A hero is not someone who always does the right thing. At least from this perspective, it's someone who is willing to sacrifice. Maybe even sacrifice what is morally good. For the greater good. The sunrise that he's referring to is visualized at the end of this episode. I think it's in the final shot, or maybe it's an episode after this one. But when Cassian is out of the prison, there's this one shot where you see that, I don't know if it's a sunset or a sunrise, but it's very evocative of one of the finals, or the final scene in Rogue One, where Cassian is about to die, and it's the same setting. There's the sun above the horizon, and it's in a certain way already predicting the sunrise that will come at the end of the rebellion, where this all will lead to when the Death Star is destroyed and the sun can rise again over the galaxy. That wraps up my thoughts for this episode 10 of Andor. It was one of the most memorable episodes, and I just did not expect the prison story to be wrapped up like this, and I can't wait to see how everything that we've seen so far will impact the choices of our characters in the next 2 episodes. How's everybody doing in the chat? Sorry about my my monologue. It's not possible for me to react to the comments because I'm recording a podcast while I'm doing this. Selena says also, Martin Luther King had his famous speech where he says, "You can never separate the ends from the means." That's true. That's true. That's why Luthen is morally a very gray character. There's also this kind of like this. It makes you think: is there another way? Is there a more moral way? I personally don't think you can kill someone like Cassian just because you think he's going to do the wrong thing. I think that's morally not the right thing to do. You cannot obtain a good by doing what is morally wrong. But definitely from the perspective of someone like Luthen, they make you believe, they make you at least feel the conundrum that he's in and that he's presented with. And he thinks there's only one way out. The same is true for Mon Mothma. I think it would be morally wrong to sacrifice your own daughter for the rebellion. It's terrible. And maybe they'll resolve it in some way or another where, maybe it's not as bad as we think it now is, but can you do that as a mother? Would you go so far? Wow. And what if she hadn't done that? Dilemmas. Star Wars should never lose its sci-fi style roots for a more soap opera style. I don't mind a combination of both, but keep the fun in Star Wars, says Steve. Yeah, I don't think this is soap opera, though. Luthen was definitely intimidating. And the actors, all the acting is fantastic. And it's not just the actors, because we've had great actors in the movies as well. It's also the direction, it's the editing, it's the dialogue. A great actor with lousy direction or terrible dialogue will do a subpar job. And this is why this series is such a great confluence of quality, which is also setting the bar pretty high. And I think it's going to be very difficult to replicate this. I have high hopes for season 2, but I'm not sure if when we're seeing Ahsoka or The Mandalorian season 3, that was all produced before we saw Andor. So the expectations are here, but maybe we'll just get this for the time being. I don't know. It's kind of a fluent progression anyway. I'm sure that Star Wars will get better over time because Disney and Lucasfilm, they too are learning from our reactions and how, what comes out of this creative process. This is why I'm so excited about Bob Iger saying in one of the first things he told the people at Disney was that he wants to give more power to the creators. And that is a good sign because that's what you need in order to improve. I have to say, I've got a bit of a headache. I apologize. I didn't sleep that well, and doing these long commentaries, it's very challenging, but I'll try to fight my way through all the way to Rick's Road. Star Wars Andor, Episode 11, Daughter of Ferrix. One more episode to go. We're almost there, and everything is starting to come together. It is another amazing episode with maybe one of the most emotional moments left out. It's something that has a huge impact on the people of Ferrix, on Cassian, and maybe on the entire story. But we don't get to see it when the episode starts. It has already happened, of course. I'm talking about the first thing that is mentioned here in the synopsis that I'm about to read. Marva, Cassian's foster mom, has died. And they didn't show us her death scene. So Marva died, prompting a funeral ceremony on Ferrix, which Miro encourages Dedra in the hopes that Andor will attend. Vel informs Clea about Marva's death and learns of Mon Mothma's reluctant plan to marry off her daughter to secure funding through Skulden. Mon Mothma's daughter Lyda begins taking part in a group gathering, or in group gatherings, related to Chandrilan culture and traditions, much to the distress of Mon Mothma and Vel. Mon Mothma and Vel probably have been brought up in this tradition, but they kind of stepped away from it. And now they see that their daughter is engaging in these, almost looks like a prayer meeting. And she's wearing that very traditional dress. This is something that I did not expect her daughter to do, because she seemed to be more of the rebellious type. And so you don't associate that with kind of reverting to older traditions that the parents have already left behind. I think this is something that maybe people with a religious background may sometimes see. If I apply this to my own experience, I've seen this same thing happening with older priests, so the generation before me, who in the 60s and in the 70s deliberately stepped back from a number of traditions that they were brought up with. They experienced them to be suffocating and a thing of the past, and they were very enthusiastic about all the renewal that was taking place. And then a generation after them, of which I am part, we started to rediscover the value of those traditions. My generation started to wear clerical vestments again, the Roman collar and all that. Liturgy-wise, we are more traditional. We appreciate the sometimes centuries-old traditions. And it's only one generation after the previous one. So I've had older priests, react to me and to the choices that I make as a priest in the same way as Mon Mothma and Vel are now talking about Lyda. Like, we can't believe, why is she going back to these traditions? And especially Mon Mothma, of course, is worried that, well, she knows the price that she had to pay for these traditions when it comes to like an arranged marriage, and how much that made her miserable. And now her daughter seems to voluntarily engage in that direction. On the other hand, of course, this may create an opening for Mon Mothma to go along with the plan of Skulden to follow the traditions and let Lyda and his son be introduced to one another, because it makes it maybe a bit less hard to do, because Lyda herself seems to give an opening to her mother, of course, all without knowing what the plan is. Cyril Karn, so glad to see him back here in this episode, also learns about the funeral from Mosk. He gets a FaceTime call from Mosk and is like, you've got to come back. And I was like, oh my gosh, these two are so good together. It's such an unlikely pair. I could watch an entire television series with just these two guys. It's the odd couple, and it works so well. And it's also the Mosk is kind of like this loyal dog, It's like this bulldog, like, I'm gonna bark at anything. Just say the word. Whereas actually, Karn has no idea what he's doing. He's not as experienced as Mosk, but Mosk has this, I don't know, strange loyalty towards Karn, and it's in a way touching almost. If they weren't working for the bad guys. So he journeys to Ferrix. Saw Gerrera, in the meantime, decides at the very last moment that he will assist Krieger's attack on Spellhouse. But then Luthen does the opposite of what he initially seemed to be advocating. He advises against it. Don't give them air support, revealing that the ISB knows about the impending assault. And so, if they let the Empire win, it will lower the kind of the suspicion of the Empire. And so here now Luthen is ready to sacrifice rebels, his own people, for the bigger plan. Again, Luthen is making a morally wrong choice or a gray choice for the greater, well, for the ulterior goal that he wants to reach. And Saw Gerrera is shocked, but he too, of course, is a morally very gray character, and so ultimately ends up concluding, well, this is what war is. There are no good guys and bad guys in a war. Everybody, in a certain way, has dirty hands. It's very cynical. It's very dark. But that's why it feels so real. While returning to Coruscant, Luthen escapes from an Imperial patrol, destroying several TIE fighters, and ultimately also destroying the radar dishes on this Imperial ship. I'll get back to this scene because I thought it was absolutely amazing. I did not see this coming, and I thought everything about that little event in space is just what the Doctor ordered. With the help from the Caridians fishers Dewey and Freedy Pamular, this is something I was super excited about, to see aliens. We haven't seen that many aliens in Andor, and you start to think, well, is it still Star Wars if we don't have these wacky aliens? Well, we got two great aliens, and ultimately they look gruesome, and they seem to capture Cassian and the other guy. But then ultimately, very quickly, they are willing to help, which is something I did not expect. So someone who looks awful actually can still be a good guy, or a good alien in this case. That was pretty cool. And the whole way, the prosthetics and everything, it was fantastic. I'm sure that the people at Lucasfilm were very happy that at least they could do these two aliens. It's action figure material. I think we do need. We're going to see Lego minifigs of these two. Cassian and fellow prisoner Rescut Melshi, who actually we see him in Rogue One, so he's got an ulterior story. Same actor, are able to escape from Narkina 5, and they travel to Niamos to recover Cassian's belongings. So that's the Miami planet. After Cassian discovers Marva has passed, Cassian and Melshi part ways, intending to publicly expose the Empire's unjust prison system. And that's the end of the synopsis of episode 11. Daughter of Ferrix, the title, of course, refers to Marva. She is a daughter of Ferrix. She's part of this very esteemed group of older ladies with great wisdom and apparently also great influence. We don't know much about their culture, but again, I love that they introduce this very traditional element. And this is something that continues to play an interesting role in the story, that almost religious elements are starting to be introduced in contrast with this very sterile, agnostic, or maybe even atheist empire environment where they don't want to deal with religion, ancient beliefs, witchcraft, and wizardry. For them, it's all about efficiency, and that's also why Darth Vader is such a weird component of the Empire, and we see this in The New Hope, where um, officers, Imperial officers, are poo-pooing Darth Vader's belief in these ancient rituals, and Darth Vader, of course, is like, "I find your lack of faith disturbing," and rightfully so, because I find that lack of faith of the Empire also very disturbing. Um, but I am applauding the fact that these ritual, traditional, almost religious elements are part of the galaxy, a part of the universe, and they do play a role. They help people to make choices that otherwise they wouldn't make. The daughters of Ferrix almost could be seen as priestesses in a certain way in the ancient both Latin and Greek world. You would have these powerful women that formed groups of like dedicated virgins, for instance. They would prophesize, they would advise people, they would even influence politics because of their wisdom, and people would listen to them. And here, the daughter of Ferrix seemed to reflect that cultural element from our own history, but then on the planet of Ferrix. And these daughters are a symbol, I think, for the Ferrix, the culture on Ferrix, which is very much almost like it's as if the whole rhythm of life on Ferrix is influenced by these old traditions that are ultimately more powerful than the efficiency and the war power of the Empire, because the Empire doesn't have those traditions, doesn't understand these traditions, and doesn't seem to acknowledge the destructive power of these traditions. And so the clanging of that bell tower that we saw at the very first beginning of the series, and is repeated now and will be repeated later on, it's clearly a tradition. We don't know exactly why they have that bell tower, what the meaning is of this signal, but it doesn't matter, because it is clearly symbolizing the power of that tradition when it comes to resisting what the Empire stands for, the kind of atheism of the Empire. I like it. Let's see what else. I already talked about the fishermen aliens. I thought it was surprising but cool. It's almost feels a bit out of place here. And I was wondering what happened to the other prisoners. Why don't we see what happened to them? And it turns out that Cassian and Melshi also don't know what happened to them. They probably just swam for their lives, and they're the only one that washed up ashore, and that is also what makes them feel so responsible for getting the word out about this prison. Because what if all the others were killed or drowned? Then they are the ones who need to tell the world what the Empire is doing in secret. Let's talk a bit about Luthen's escape. That too felt like almost a mini sequence that wasn't entirely necessary for the story. They could have just shown him returning to Coruscant under the radar, but they do this confrontation that felt a bit like Star Trek. Also, Star Trek always has these, like the galaxy is so big, and yet Star Trek always bumps into these other spaceships, and it's like, okay, what are the odds? Well, it's a television series. that determines the odds. Here's the same thing. What are the odds that Luthen encounters this Imperial patrol? After all, this is Coruscant. The Empire has a firm grip there. Why would they have to do all this all these patrols? It's a tiny ship. It's just one man. And then you've got this big ship that finds him and then tries to board him. They don't believe his story. But it's of course to show us, to give us a glimpse of how powerful Luthen truly is. And it turns out he's a great pilot as well. He's got a lot of tricks on his sleeve, and his tiny spaceship feels like a James Bond car. You press a few buttons, and all of a sudden it turns into a into a weapon that is able to destroy the TIE fighters and to even damage the Imperial ship so much that they can't hold him. The tractor beam is broken and Luthen can escape. What I loved about this sequence is, first of all, finally we get to see some space battles. This is Star Wars. We've seen a lot of wars. We haven't seen many stars. Well, this compensates for that. So I love this sequence. I also really appreciated that for the design of this Imperial ship, they go back to one of the first drawings that Ralph McQuarrie made of what ultimately turned out to be the Star Destroyer. This was an early design, and they've done this with The Mandalorian as well, where they went back to, and also even in the book of Boba Fett, with the Tusken culture, they took these old drawings made by Ralph McQuarrie that were kind of discarded in a certain way. It helped sell the movie for George Lucas. But then in the designs that he greenlit, they didn't go with a lot of the elements that Rolf McQuarrie had painted. But now they do. They go back to these designs. And so when you go back to that old catalog of pre-production art, you're like, oh my gosh, I know this ship. I know this. And I grew up with Rolf McQuarrie's artwork, and I loved the way it all looked. And I was almost sad that a lot of that very imaginary stuff that he painted never came to fruition, but now it does. Decades later, I love this. It was absolutely fantastic. There were two things that shocked me a little bit. It's like these lasers, almost like a big version of the Darth Maul's lightsaber. The two laser beams that all of a sudden start spinning around, and then Luthen uses that to destroy the TIE fighters. I don't think we've seen technology like that in space. And then him actually shooting at these radar dishes, or maybe one of those dishes is also the tractor beam, but he uses projectiles. He uses munition. That's a first, as far as I know. That doesn't really make sense. But whenever there was a fight, it was always with lasers and laser bolts, but never with like metallic bullets. But it worked, and they even had the sound like a. It made it feel very much like something from a World War I or World War II flight or fight sequence in the air, which obviously is what George Lucas used when he was creating a template for the people at ILM for what these space battles would look like. He would use I think World War I footage, and he would just cut it into what was already filmed, and then ILM had to figure out how to make that look, sci-fi, and how they would replace all that footage with similar looking stuff. And then of course in this old black and white footage, you would have those old-fashioned weapons, and so they brought that also into the way they portrayed this sequence. I thought it was brilliant. So another thing that I thought was amazing was the choice to let Marva die between the episodes, to not show it, but to show us the grief of the people left behind. This is something that you learn in film school and also in film analysis, that sometimes not showing something can have a bigger impact than showing it. Like, you can kill someone on screen and show the blood and everything, and it's gruesome. Sometimes it's even more impactful to imply what happened, to not show it, because your mind kind of fills in the gaps. And you may have seen, this is years ago, The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's rendition of the crucifixion of Jesus. I was appalled by the graphic nature of that movie. There were a lot of things that I appreciated, but I didn't like at all the the gruesome. It felt like a horror movie. I was like, this is not the way to do this. I don't need to see this. There was this one moment where it broke my heart and it made me cry. And it was not seeing all the wounds on the body of Christ or the cruelty of his crucifixion. There was this one shot where they film Mary, his mother, and you see her tears and her grief. And that one shot of the face of Jesus' mother was so much more powerful than all the torture that they filmed or kind of made us believe we saw. And I think here what broke my heart in this penultimate episode was to see B2MO, to see this small, vulnerable, older droid. It's like an old Labrador, like an old dog. And you see his pain and his grief and his inability to let go. I want to stay here. I don't want to go. Please stay with me. And you see the kindness of the other people for B2MO. And that they want to give him room to grief. And that's how you feel the pain yourself. It's even more powerful than when we see Cassian reacting to the death of his mother. Cassian is, of course, he's distraught, but I don't think that his reaction had the same impact as seeing B2MO. I thought it was, again, it's a deliberate choice that made me think, why do they do it like this? But I feel it's much more powerful because from the very, very first moment we saw B2MO, we all felt that connection with that little droid. And we can empathize with him. And so we feel what he feels. Isn't that amazing? It's a droid. It doesn't even has any humanoid features. It's just his eye and it's a box. It's a red box. It's just goes to show how incredibly well done this series is. Even in the way they use a droid of all creatures to help us feel what the people who knew this daughter of Ferrix must have felt at that moment. Pure genius. Let me talk about the main theme here. I think what this episode needs to establish is that everything seems to go off the rails, off track. There is this impending dread because the Empire knows that Cassian is going to be at the funeral. Cyril knows that his nemesis is going to be there, and he is going down there to Ferrix as well. And so after the elation of the prison escape, where they could have ended the season, let's be honest, it would be this big summit, like, oh my gosh, they're free. And then we wait, what will happen next? No, they go beyond that because they want to show us that this was only a temporary victory. And every good story has that little bump in the road before the end, even elevating the stakes even more. And here it's, of course, like, not only is there the incredible sadness of the passing of Marva, but also this death seems to be the end of this of all our good people there, because it's going to be the occasion for the Empire to destroy everyone who will gather there at Ferrix. It's a big cliffhanger, and of course, kind of subconsciously, but Cassian is going to live because we know he's going to live because of Rogue One. But we don't know anything about all the other characters. What about what's her name? The girl who was tortured by the Empire. We don't know if she's going to survive. They killed off other characters. We don't know about Cassian's friends there. We don't know anything about B2MO. Is he gonna live? Um, Luthen? Dedra? Well, I'm not rooting for Dedra, but you don't know what's gonna happen, and so you leave this episode waiting for the finale with this dread, like, oh my gosh, I hope that it's not going to be as bad as it looks right now. Brilliant episode. Every time I think they can't top what they've done, and then the next episode is even better. This is raising the bar so high for this final episode, for the season's finale. Well, can't wait to see what happens. Okay, those were my thoughts for episode 11. Sorry, I'm a bit long-winded in my commentary. As I presumed, we're going to go over an hour, or we are already over an hour here. Let me quickly go through your comments here. Cyril modifying his clothes to have high collars is him trying to emulate those who he feels have power and control. Exactly. It's very symbolic. And he had Empire toys on his dresser. Good point. That's great. I forgot about that. Yeah, he's a boy who wants to be a grown-up. Cassian is hiding his pain. That's a good point. He needs to suppress his feelings for the sake of looking strong. Good point. They're definitely giving hints to Luthen having a Jedi background. Is Kane Handel? Yeah. Could be a red herring, of course, but maybe he was called to be a Jedi and chose to become a rebel because he didn't like the Jedi. Maybe that. I don't know. What happened is he made them make the tractor beam stronger, which resulted in the munition to be dragged to them really strongly. Ah, is that what happened? I did not realize that. Fascinating. I don't mind that there hasn't been much action in the series, but I understand how the lack of it has turned away casual non-fans from watching the series. Yeah, but I also think that the way they approach this series has brought in and will continue to bring in people that will never watch Star Wars. Because you can watch this without having seen any other Star Wars movie, or it's that good. So I think it's actually a very good gateway to the rest of the Star Wars universe. For people that may not have ever been considering watching Star Wars because it's for kids. That's what people say. Well, you can't say that about Andor. That is... It stands on its own feet. Mira will be the one to be redeemed, and Cyril will get new power. Maybe. Luthen is a boss. I'm most excited for the development of Cyril. Will he get to be an Imperial officer? Will he join the rebellion? It can go either way. Maybe they haven't even decided yet. Or maybe they didn't know when they were writing the first season what would happen, what would be his ultimate choice. But I feel like at least if he turns, there is enough reason for him to turn. It could also, it can go both ways. That's the genius of his story arc. You feel for him because of his mother and just the oppression of his ambitions. And he can use that to either go with that anger and he will become a horrible nemesis, or he can decide that no more of this. I want to stand up against that kind of oppression and the realization that the Empire actually is like his mother. That, of course, would be the story arc that I would prefer. But, yeah, I don't know. Why do you all think they silently exchanged hats. What was that again? The exchange of hats. Was that in the finale? I think that was in the finale, right? I don't remember that exactly. It does ring a bell, but that must be a significant moment because a hat, of course, is symbolical, so of your function. Maybe you can enlighten me in the comments. If not, I will continue the final episode. Unfortunately, my finale episode is going to be a bit. I have to wing that. I just didn't have time to prepare much of what I was going to say. So I'll just give you my first reaction to the finale. I didn't really go in depth in my research. This is something I learned from doing these commentaries. I thought I was smart by grouping 3 episodes in one podcast, but it's too much. There's just so much to say, and then having to wait 3 weeks. This is now like it's already a week has passed since the last episode, and it's hard to go back. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, deep dives are a lot of work. I've seen the hat exchange was a way to quicker identify each other in the crowd. But was it in the finale or was it in episode 11? I forgot the specifics of that. Okay. Let's just wing it. Let's just go with the last episode because I've got a bit of a fever, I think. I don't feel that well. Okay. Oh, it's in the finale. Okay. Very good. Here we go. Let's wait for the cars outside to pass by. Star Wars Andor, Episode 12, Rick's Road. It is time to discuss the finale of this great first season of Andor. This is where everything comes together. And let's start with a synopsis of what happened in this epic episode. Cassian returns to Ferrix for Marva's funeral, and he learns of Bix's imprisonment. Dedra Meero and the local Imperial garrison prepare to use the funeral to take Andor alive for questioning regarding Axis. That's the only name that the Empire knows Luthen by. While Luthen himself plans, with Vel and Cinta's assistance, to kill Cassian during the Imperial ambush as a cover. Or using the Imperial ambush as a cover. Mon Mothma continues being surveilled by the ISB. Her driver, who she's suspected to be a spy, actually, we see him spying or listening in on a conversation between her and her husband. The ISB succeeded in stopping Krieger's attack, but they haven't left any prisoners, which angers Dedra because she wants to interrogate people. Maybe it's a good thing that no one survived, knowing now of her methods. Mon Mothma's 13-year-old daughter, Lyda, is introduced to Davo Skulden's 14-year-old son. So she went along with the plan to just placate Skulden in order to get the money. During the funeral, B2 Emo displays a recording of Marva, a holographic recording, but it's much, much bigger than for instance, the hologram of Leia in A New Hope. He, as old as he is, he's able to do like a very, very big projection of Marva's last words. It's like her testament. And she rallies the populace to attack the Empire, creating a riot in the main quarter. During the confusion, Cassian rescues Bix, while Cyril Karn saves Dedra Meero from being attacked. Meeting with B2 Emo, Brasso and several others, Brasso and several others in a shipyard, the same shipyard that we've seen previously, Cassian convinces them to take Bix somewhere safe away from Ferrix. Moved by the rebellion on Ferrix, Luthen returns to his ship where Cassian is waiting. Knowing that Luthen was there to assassinate him, Cassian offers Luthen the choice to either kill him or take him in, to which Luthen smiles. And then, in a post-credit scene, droids assemble the machinery produced by the Narkina 5 prisoners on the firing dish of the Death Star. That final shot, I felt that millions of Star Wars fans united together in one big scream of elation when seeing that. That was so brilliant. Such an amazing post-credit scene. My initial impressions, this was everything I hoped for and more. It was different from the finale that I projected. I thought that they would, I don't know, maybe have a space battle, or I don't know what I was thinking, but I didn't want to predict too much what was going to happen. But in hindsight, it makes so much sense to return to Ferrix, if only for the fact that they built, and this was, I think, one of the big advantages of this series was that they built Ferrix as a practical set. They didn't use the volume, but they built a real huge set, much bigger actually than the Tatooine set that they built for Obi-Wan Kenobi, because I think that Obi-Wan Kenobi was made on a much smaller budget. But here it's this big town, and it's even enhanced with the few CGI scenes of the bell tower, and sometimes you see how big Ferrix actually is, but you have to you're confined to the limitations of the practical set for all your close-ups and much of the action. And thankfully they did that very, very well. And it was so good to end where the story began. And here I want to make a comment on what I think is the big difference between Andor and series like The Mandalorian or The Book of Boba Fett or Obi-Wan Kenobi. I saw this on a YouTube channel where someone analyzed like the difference in cinematography, not really the cinematography, but the way in which the scenes are directed. So what we've often seen when they have to work with a limited practical set is they do this sweeping flyover first. You saw that in The Mandalorian. You see this also in The Book of Boba Fett and in Obi-Wan Kenobi. There's this flying camera, and you see this sprawling city below. And then the next shot is that of a spaceship that lands somewhere on a landing path. And then the next scenes are all taking place within that set, which always is a bit disappointing, because you know that, oh, well, so now all of a sudden we don't get to see the rest of the city, because of course that would be a bit too expensive. Your mind tells you in those first overviews that it's obviously a special effect. You know that because we don't have a planet called Tatooine, and we don't have cities like that. So, and the same is true for Coruscant. The way we were introduced to Coruscant at the end of the special editions in Return of the Jedi, it was these big overviews of the celebrations taking place there, and it was beautiful. But at the same time, special effects. We didn't get to see Coruscant in the way we saw it here in Andor, and what makes the approach of Andor so genius and why psychologically it works so well is, instead of starting with the special effects and then zooming in, think for instance of the sequence with the young Jedi training in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. You have this camera that shows us Coruscant, and then it pulls back. It flies through the window of the Jedi temple, and then it ends on these children that are getting their Jedi training. but you start with the special effect and you end with reality. So your mind is already like, it's fake. Andor, in a very, very deliberate way, starts always in reality. Remember that first shot of Andor? The first episode seems like a lifetime ago. What do you see first? It rains. You see these lights. You don't know exactly what happens. You see feet in the rain running. And then you get to see it's Cassian Andor. He's running. What is he running towards? The camera slowly pans back a little bit, and it's only in the final shot of that rain that you see him standing on this bridge with the lights, and then in the distance, that's the special effects. You see at the horizon, you see the city where he is. So it starts with reality and then pulls back and it fills in the rest. You see this in the finale happening as well. Every time we see Ferrix, it starts with the close-ups. It starts in a real environment. And none of that is done with LED screens. And it's only at certain moments, for instance, when Luthen arrives with his ship, or you see that bus vehicle, you know, the I love the design of that. Landing, that's where you get a little bit of a view of the rest of Ferrix, but it's not that important. They could have even left it out and it would still have worked. So it doesn't depend on the special effects. It's just an extra, a little extra. So for the finale, it starts with this haunting scene that apparently was one of the first things that the director and Tony Gilroy wanted to focus upon. And apparently they spent weeks, if not months, developing the music of that scene. It's the fanfare. So all these musicians that are attuning their instruments, and then gradually they start to play together. And once all these instruments mix, then you realize that it's actually the theme of Andor. It's got the same harmonics as this electronic music that we've heard since the beginning of Andor. So here, in the way they filmed this scene, it's the same procedure. They start with real people playing real instruments, making real sounds, and then it merges into this synthesizer theme that we are so familiar with. And the special effects are rooted in reality. In fact, did you know that the music of the funeral march was recorded on set? The instruments that the actors are playing are real instruments. They rehearsed. Every actor had to rehearse his or her musical lines. And so it's insane. They didn't have to do that, but they did. And you feel it because it's kind of a little bit out of tune. If they had done this with an orchestra later on and they had just dubbed over it, your mind would have noticed it. This is the big issue that I always have with movies and TV shows that show the main actor playing the piano. Just the other day, I was watching For All Mankind, which is Ronald D. Moore's science fiction series on Apple TV. I love that series. And then one of the characters, Margot, is playing the piano. She's a jazz musician in her spare time. And you see her play the piano, and I play a little bit of piano myself, and you can tell it's fake. It's a real pianist. When you see a close-up of the fingers, of course, it's not her. And then when they pull back, you see her moving her hands, but it's not congruent with the music. Or they only show her face behind, so her hands are hidden. But it just doesn't work. And that could have easily broken the realism of this funeral scene in this final episode. But I have to give it to Tony Gilroy. It's like, no, let's do this for real. And it's just pure genius. Anyway, what also I think was brilliant about the finale was the role of B2 Emo. we know how much this little droid has suffered, how vulnerable he is. In a certain way, B2 Emo is very much like Marva. He's old. He stutters. He doesn't have much energy anymore. But it is the weak that become the strong leaders of the rebellion. And so, just as Marva in this finale becomes the spark that sets everything on fire, that makes everything explode, B2MO, this old dog like droid, is the one who leads the pack. Uh, he is rolling forward in the streets of Ferrix, and he is the one who projects this hologram of Marva, uh, his owner, and reveals the testament, and risks his life doing that. The moment he gets kicked over by that Imperial officer, I was like, don't touch B2MO. That's our droid. It's genius. I mean, just the way they did this. It's similar to sometimes in war movies they have the same trick. Whenever you see a movie about the Second World War or whatever, yeah, people die. It's kind of part of the storytelling. We're accustomed to that. It doesn't do much to us. And so you see people getting shot and soldiers falling, and none of that really touches a chord. But then sometimes there will be this dog that accompanies one of the soldiers, or maybe it's a dog from one of the poor people that have been oppressed by the Nazis, and then they kill the dog. And you're like, no, not the dog. Some video games even did that, where the protagonist of the video game has a dog, and the dog helps you to feel what is going on. The emotional bond between the main character and the dog is something that we can all relate to, especially if you have had a pet or still have a pet yourself. And so this now, at the final episode, you understand why B2EMO was introduced in the first episode of Andor. It was all planned because he was going to be the main emotional conduit for this funeral. Even Cassian, and I talked about that also in my analysis of episode 11, even Cassian doesn't show much emotion, and he can't because he has a job to do. This was one of the things that shocked me about this finale, is that I expected Cassian to have this big emotional breakdown with tears, and that emotional moment, his grief, would break through this outer layer of Cassian. That's what I expected. That's how I would have written the finale. Like, oh, so finally his mother gets through to him. He breaks down and he's like, yeah, Mom, I will join the rebellion. None of that happens. It thwarts my expectations. Instead, Cassian, yes, he is on the planet for the funeral, but he is not, well, he's watching. He's not even there in the streets. He's watching from a distance. He doesn't show much emotion. And then he just takes off because he wants to save Biggs. He is going to risk his life. He uses the funeral of his mother as a cover for his attempt to free Biggs. And he wants to save her. That is so not what I expected. But it doesn't matter, because the emotion doesn't have to come from Cassian. It's not his reaction that is going to make us tear up. It's B2EMO. B2EMO or B2EMO. It's this brave little droid who walks down Ferrix Road to lead the pack, to lead the rebellion. And it's the cruelty of the Empire that knocks him over, that makes us feel the rage. You feel very protective of this droid. And so you feel what all these other people are feeling. Like the Empire is cruel and it's time to let loose of our anger. This is so incredibly well done and so well constructed because you realize that they've been planning this all along. Oh man, that was so cool. Um, I also expected Bix to have a bigger role in this finale. I thought that the her prison break by Cashin would be heroic, and that she would embrace him, and then she would return to normal, and then maybe just join him for future adventures. It seemed like a given. None of that happens. Again, it's the realism of this series to show us that the Empire's interrogation methods can truly break someone. And we don't even know uh, if she's ever gonna recover from this. She's been so damaged, and now that I've seen the finale, I wouldn't want to have it any other way. Too often in television shows like this, um, heroes will go through an ordeal. They will suffer. They will be tortured, and then, or even hurt. They will be shot, and then, oh, it's just a flesh wound. And 5 minutes later, they're back as if nothing happened. That always feels a bit unrealistic. You know that it's necessary for the story, but it would undermine the threat of the Empire. And again, it's not the cruelty, because they cut away from the actual torture when Bix is, when she's tortured with the sounds of these dying children, and with the Nazi doctor who is there. He's so creepy because he seems kind, but he's actually horrible. They cut away just like they did with Leia in the Death Star. So the radio drama that I mentioned in one of my previous reviews actually gives us more information about what happens and about the actual torture. But the movie cuts away, and also Andor cuts away from the torture. But we gradually realize how horrible that torture was, seeing Bix, who was introduced to us as this beautiful, talented girl, courageous, and she's just a ghost. She's just a shadow of her former self. That is, again, deliberately done. She's almost, in a certain way, when I saw her, is like, yeah, that's she's a bit too good looking for a series like this. It felt unrealistic, and then seeing her completely destroyed. That's like, oh, now I understand why they show her almost like a Star Wars princess in the first episode, because they were already planning on completely destroying her in every aspect, so that we would realize that the Empire can destroy people, can completely demolish them. So again, it's all planned out since the very first episode. The other story thread, of course, that comes to a temporary conclusion is that of Mon Mothma. And she does the unthinkable. She chooses to throw her husband and her child, her only daughter, under the bus. I thought, I didn't really mind doing that to her husband, because nobody liked him. His character is so well done. I kind of feel for the actor, because, he does a great job making himself so incredibly unlikable. But she picks up her husband from this party that they were at, and she's already waiting in the taxi, and he is just not coming. And you see her, she's flustered, she's tense. She knows what's going to happen. She's going to have to make the spy, her taxi driver, or her personal chauffeur, believe that that her husband is to blame for the financial problems in their bank account. And then she kind of gets a grip on herself, and she opens her coat like that, and she is like modifying her hair, and she's literally like opening herself up for what's to come. And then her husband finally arrives, and this is all too realistic as well. And she's playing it so well because she probably deliberately left earlier so he would be looking for her, and then ultimately realize that, well, she's probably already in the car. But she wants to have the chauffeur believe that he's late again. He's been just drinking with friends, and then she says, "You were gambling again, right?" And he is like, "No, I'm not." But of course, he's probably been lying to her for years. The chauffeur, having been their driver for so long, knows that there's so much tension between these two, so it feels completely in character that he denies any wrongdoing. And the fact that she says you've been gambling again shows that she's exploiting one of his weaknesses. He probably has been gambling and using money, and even though he is probably not doing that right now, he's in recovery there. She just puts the stake in his heart, and yes, you are the reason that I've lost so much money. And that's exactly what is then communicated to the ISB. It was kind of nice to see Dedra's rival again falling for this and going in the wrong direction, as always. And yeah, well, that's probably it. That's probably why. So they were already onto her. They had already seen the financial issues there. So she was only one step away from being discovered. But now she can blame her husband. But that's not the only thing. That's probably relatively easy sacrifice to make. Although, seeing how much she stands up for justice in the Senate, it still is a dark thing to do for a senator. She's betraying her own values. But then the worst is still to come when her daughter is being introduced to this young boy. And strangely enough, you see the two glance at each other, these teenagers, and there seems to be a bit of a spark. I think that Lyda is actually like, oh, he's actually not that bad looking, and this could work. And I think the same, it's just, you just see them, they don't talk, but it's suggested that actually this may work. This may work out. But then, of course, the father is also part of the equation. So Mon Mothma risks being like involved in the crimes of the father of that boy. So it's not just losing her daughter, but she's also potentially compromising her political future. If they ever catch him, she and her family will be collateral damage of that. But all in all, maybe that's the most horrific thing in the finale. It's like this mother actually sacrifices her daughter and her husband, her family. And maybe that's why when we ultimately see her in A New Hope and in the rest of the original trilogy, she's alone. There's no husband, there's no daughter, there's no family. How is this going to end? I don't think there is a good solution for this choice. But at least for now, the plan works, and the financing of the rebellion has been safeguarded. Let's talk about Luthen. Luthen, of course, also decides to go to Ferrix, which kind of maybe is not that necessary. Why would he go? He could have asked just Vel to do the execution. But he wants to be there. Maybe because he doesn't trust Vel. That's possible. Maybe he's like, well, if they fail, then I'll have to do the job myself. Or maybe he feels that there is the possibility that Cassian will join the rebellion. I kind of, it's never said, but I wouldn't be surprised that deep down below, Luthen is still at least considering the possibility that he won't have to kill Cassian. And then Cassian, of course, does also something that is very brave and stupid, totally stupid. After the funeral, after having saved Biggs, he puts them on a spaceship and then promises them, I will return. I will find you. I will join you again. Does that remind you of something? This is mirroring Anakin, young Anakin, when he tells his mother, I will return. When he shares his dreams about freeing the slaves on Tatooine, he pictures himself as the redeemer who will join these poor people that he temporarily left alone, and he will make good on his promise, but of course he's too late. And that puts him on the path of the dark side for good. Cassian here does something reckless. He says, I will join you. It gives them hope. And then the next thing he does is present himself to Luthen, who he knows wants to kill him, and tells him, you know what, just go ahead, kill me, or accept me as one of the rebels. Now, the only reason that he's doing this is because this episode is the conversion story of Cassian. Ever since the first episode, we've seen him struggle with the call that he receives, with his vocation. We know that ultimately he's going to be a hero of the rebellion, giving the ultimate sacrifice, the greatest love that you can give is to give your life for your friends. That is what Cassian does, ultimately. Very, very biblically at the end of Rogue One. But this entire first season, we've seen a reluctant hero. We've seen him trying to wiggle his way out. He doesn't want this rebellion. He just wants a good life for himself and for his mother. But he keeps losing. He keeps seeing that this is not the way, as the Mandalorian would say. Everything that he thought he could hold on to is taken away from him. And so this is, I think, the moment, the death of his mother, seeing how Biggs has been destroyed by the Empire, maybe also realizing that the Empire is too big and won't go away by itself. That's, I think, the lesson he learned in prison, that as long as the Empire is there and he doesn't do anything, then maybe he will find a good life, but he will never sleep anymore, because he knows that people like him are still working in those prisons. And the prison break was also a wake-up call and the first step of his true vocation, that he needs to, well, not become a redeemer, but he needs to join this movement of liberation from this oppression. So the world of Cassian has become bigger and bigger over the course of this first season. And now that he's lost his mother, who has given her life for the rebellion, who sacrificed herself to be the spark that ignites the fire, he realizes that now his final step is either to die, because he's nothing else to live for anymore, or to give his life for the rebellion and to put his future in the hands of the leaders of the rebellion. And so he has nothing to lose. That's probably why he says, you can kill me, because I have nothing else to live for but the rebellion. And this is what brings me to what I thought was the most awesome scene in this entire last episode, and that was where he's reading the diary of Karis Nemik, the boy who also gave his life for the rebellion, and who wrote down his thoughts about the kind of the ideology of the rebellion. And at first, Cassian didn't even want to have that diary. He didn't want to read it, never spent any time. But now he does. And he hears, it was beautiful to hear the voice of the actor who plays Nemik again, saying, and this is my favorite quote, "Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks, it leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that." This must have been the wake-up call for Cassian, who has seen that the Achilles heel of the Empire is that they are actually afraid, very afraid. The whole display of power is just a facade. We see this in the sequence with Dedra and Cyril, where Dedra, who seemed to be unstoppable in her ambition, who is such a menacing presence in this entire season, she ends up in this final episode utterly afraid, to completely out of control. Her mask falls. She is literally on the floor. There's no one who can save her but this crazy guy who keeps stalking her. The one that she despises the most, Cyril Karn, is the one who has to lift her up and bring her to safety. It shows that Dedra is the symbol of the Empire. It's all posing, but it's driven by fear. There's no real courage there, just blind ambition. But blind ambition and power are actually powerless when confronted with faith and a story and a song and music. All these categories are not present in the Empire. They cannot relate to how the rebellion works, but they are now experiencing how dangerous the rebellion truly is, how dangerous faith and tradition are for this atheist future that the Empire is projecting. Remember, during the prison break, that we see all these guards cowering behind the door, hiding from these prisoners that they so brutally tortured just a few hours before. They are afraid. And fear is the heart of the Empire. And that is why the fight can be won by the brave, by the selfless, by the people who are willing to sacrifice their lives because they are not afraid of death. They're not afraid of the oppressor anymore. There is no fear in the rebellion. The whole idea of the Death Star that we see in this final post-credits scene is to be a symbol of fear. It's a very stupid idea. Have a Death Star. Yeah, it can destroy planets. What are you going to do? The galaxy is big. There's no way that one Death Star can go to war in all these different places of the Star Wars known galaxy. So it's a ridiculous thing, but it's not meant to be an efficient engine of war. It's meant to be a symbol of fear, of dread. That's not a moon. That is, the Empire needs symbols like the Death Star, mechanical symbols, like these big K2SO droids that are ruthless, and because that's the only symbol they can think of to keep people under control. But the Death Star is nothing confronted with the very simple grassroots rebellion that feeds on a song, on the words of a deceased old woman who stands up and uses her last testament not to comfort her son, not to say words of goodbye, but to use those final minutes to say what can't be said. Actually, they cut that out. She said something in very, very strong words, and they chickened out. They didn't want to put that in the finale. Probably a good choice, but it just goes to show that she just doesn't care what people think of her. She doesn't even care what we think about the words that she chooses, and she uses this hologram as a call to arms, and it works. Everything ignites. The whole situation explodes. And again, the choreography of these scenes, very, very chaotic, brilliant. Nothing is what you would normally see in a sequence like. Compare this to the finale of the Book of Boba Fett, with this very artificial, almost going through the motions type of fight, with the Rancor coming back, and then the kids on their motorbikes, still, it was so cartoonish, that final episode. Here it's like, oh, this looks like a war movie. This is totally believable. And then seeing someone as Dedra actually almost dying there, and seeing Cyril, who was always, the nice guy, the fancy boy who modified his own uniforms to make them look more like the heroes that he admired so much in the Empire, to see him actually risking his life for this Imperial officer that maybe he's in love with or whatever, but who doesn't care for him. He too doesn't do anything but to save Dedra, and the only reaction she has is, well, I guess I have to say thank you now. I mean, talking about a disappointing reaction. He himself wanted to be this hero, but the story doesn't make him a hero. And so this is actually, if we start to think about what will happen in season 2, the logical way to go, if this was standard Star Wars, would be once we return in season 2, Cyril will be part of the ISB, have this uniform. Maybe he is, I don't know, an Imperial officer or a general or whatever. But I wouldn't be surprised if we end up seeing Cyril back with his mom. I mean, talking about setting him up for whatever revenge he wants to inflict upon either the Empire or on the rebels. But I would not be surprised if the hero that Cyril wants to be, that dream will not be fulfilled. And this series has constantly thwarted our expectations, has done Star Wars systematically different from the Star Wars that we think we know and that we expect. It was a huge gamble, because would regular fans accept this approach? Would they understand this type of storytelling? Or is it too different? Bringing in people like Tony Gilroy, who wasn't a Star Wars fan, he wasn't even familiar with the story, to bring in directors, artists, actors that were outside the Star Wars world, to not do any fan service. The only bits and pieces, like the hidden objects and some of the stuff that the art department made, that was not even a concession, because Gilroy and the other directors weren't even aware that the art department was doing that. But to deliberately create a story that is the total opposite of what we expect a Star Wars sense. Would that pay off? I think their gamble has paid off. Maybe this is not this may not have given the numbers that they hoped for. It's much easier to go, of course, with The Mandalorian or the Book of Boba Fett or Obi-Wan, because you can watch that as a child as well. And so this is so definitely geared towards adults, and maybe adults that are actually behaving as adults, because there are a lot of adult Star Wars fans that actually are still like in their Grogu phase of life, easily distraught and angry and always wanting to reach for, "Hey, I want this, I want this, I want this." And then, no, no, Grogu, you can't have that. Well, I'm exaggerating, but this is not appealing to a broad Star Wars segment of the Star Wars fandom. But I think ultimately this will pay off. It makes Star Wars credible. It will maybe even open Star Wars to people that would never watch the movies or the animated series. But since they keep hearing about, you have to watch this. No, you don't have to watch any other thing of Star Wars to enjoy this series. It's that good. This story would work just as well in a non-Star Wars world. Because of the writing, because of the acting, because of the direction, the way it was shot, the way it was choreographed and edited. This is the best thing that has ever happened to Star Wars since its inception. And I stand by that. I'd love to hear your opinion as well. You know how to find me. Let me know. Thanks for the privilege of your time. I hope you enjoyed this. And of course, stay subscribed, stay tuned for more commentary on Star Wars and on other stories that we all love. May the Force be with you. Whew, that was the end. Okay. This 2 hours. I'm exhausted. The Grogu fans, I try to be charitable. I have some choice words that I will not ever say on air. But, yeah. And then there are people that are playing these fans for monetary gain, like the outrage culture that some people are monetizing. It's sad. Power doesn't panic. That's a good one. Hey, Mr. Clyde. Mothma's unthinkable action shows another scenario of sacrifice that happens in times of war. Really tragic. Yeah, it's a tragedy. That's why it's so good. I think Biggs might have a bigger role in future seasons. Maybe. Or maybe she will stay broken. Also, that Mon Mothma's plot is a slow burner, designed for multiple seasons. Spark of the Rebellion might have been a better name for the show. Yeah, maybe. I like the simplicity of Andor, though. Spark of the Rebellion sounds too much like Star Wars. The funny thing is, the show is called Andor, and it is about anything but Andor. Andor is one of the least interesting characters so far. But it's like Tintin. Tintin is so boring. But it's all the people around Tintin that makes these stories so good. Cassian will show his grief in a form of vengeance. Maybe, yeah. Mm-hmm. I really thought they were going to turn B2 into a bomb. No, that would have been too bad. I don't think they would have gotten away with that. That would be scandalous. No fake musicians. Yeah, I have to applaud the actors that had to learn these instruments, because I don't think they hired musicians. They hired just background actors. Mira and Cyril are so much alike. Yeah, they are. The roles are changing. Yeah, Cyril's confident, Mira's fearful. Mm-hmm. According to an interview in Empire magazine, Marva was originally going to cry F the Empire. Yeah, I think that would have distracted from the episode, because then everybody would talk only about that and not about what the story is about. So that is probably a smart decision. Mothma's introducing her daughter is another aspect of sacrifice. Yep. Alrighty. We're getting all those angry fans right now on our Willow reaction videos. Really? Wait, you do Willow reaction videos? I need to check those out. I loved Willow. I'm gonna do videos about Willow as well. That's just love what they did. I didn't expect it to be this good. But of course, it's because it's good that you get the haters. Because it means that the show is getting traction. It's actually very good news. If the haters don't care, then the series isn't just not so interesting. It's the haters, most of them are just there um, for, well, I really don't like the YouTubers that are using the resentment of these immature fans for their personal monetary gain, and that's what's happening. It's very sad. I won't name names, but I think you know who I'm talking about, or we all have examples of that. Um, you know, what we as fans do may not be very smart when it comes to monetization. This channel is not making money, but for me, the value is in being able to have these kind of conversations and to just share our common love for what they're doing with Star Wars. And if other people don't like it, well, geez, I like pizza. Some people don't like it. I like so many things that other people loathe. Doesn't stop me from loving it. Cyril has found the power of love. Hey, but late to the party. Is that your YouTube channel as well? I'm going to check that out. Because, man, Willow is awesome. I hope we're getting multiple seasons of that. I was interested. I'm not going to do Willow commentary here because I've already been talking for more than 2 hours now. But thank you so much for joining me today and for your feedback and comments. I really appreciate it. Let's do this again soon. I'm glad that I've done my job now with Andor. Let's move on. There's so much else that I want to talk about here on this channel. But Andor was a bit of a time sink, especially when it comes to preparing these commentaries. I have great respect for YouTubers that do so much better than I'm able to do, because I'm spending so much time on this, and then even I don't see all the Easter eggs and stuff. But that's why we are a community, and we can all kind of fill in the gaps. I don't think that we're competition. We're all in love with the same stories. Constructive criticism is not always hate. That is true. Yeah, absolutely. I like it when it's constructive. It's unfortunate that it's very often not constructive at all, and it becomes personal, and they attack YouTubers like me, and they ridicule the true fans. There are lots of gatekeeping going on. That is bad. It's so bad for not just for Star Wars, but for humanity in general. All right. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback, and I can't wait to check out your channel. Let's stay in touch. All right. May the Force be with you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.